Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera. Tonight, we'll be speaking about mysterious places, monsters, and the Count Dracula. I know a lot of you are familiar with the Dracula movies with Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., those kind of things. Is that Hollywood fantasy? Is that something just for our entertainment? Or do vampires really exist? Tonight, we're going to answer that question. Ed, I'd like to ask you about vampires just to start right off. Are there such a thing as vampires, and can you tell me an example of one?
Positively. Vampires do exist, what we call human vampires. The human vampire is a person who hallucinates, imagines himself as a vampire, and takes on that role. These are not the true Hollywood-type vampire, but there are cases, such as the Calbani case back in 1953 in Old Greenwich Farm Cemetery, where the Calbani family had to open up a grave, and a family member had died, and they were saving a little money by digging the grave themselves. When they got down about 4 foot, they struck a coffin which shouldn't be there. It was their private plot. The coffin was of an antique nature. They opened it up, and inside was a man about 45 years old, and he was fresh to the touch as though he had just been buried. Now, the law states that even though it's your plot in a cemetery, you can't exhume the body until you get a court order. Well, it took about a week to get that court order. In the meantime, the mother of the family went back and had the ground consecrated. And then they dug up the grave again, and this time, when they opened it up, inside was a corpse that looked as though it had been buried for many, many years, just a skeleton. The coffin itself had greatly deteriorated. At the time, it made quite a hullabaloo in the newspapers, and people wondered, was this a vampire? Well, it was a vampire, but the man was not dead when he was put into that coffin. He was a sorcerer, a black magician. He had put himself into a catatonic state, still alive, just barely. Friends of his had him buried, but at night he would leave that coffin with the astral body, very much the same way that people who are on a operating table leave their physical body, look down and see the doctors and the nurses. This man would leave, right, this man would leave during the psychic hours, 9 to 6, and he would go in search of blood, but he would not bite into anybody's neck. He could take the blood through what we call teleportation, apports. Now today, of course, with all the ways that somebody could get blood, a vampire doesn't have to attack anybody to get that blood. But while the physical body is still alive, there's a silver cord, a supernatural cord, that emanates from the physical body to the astral body. No matter how far away that astral body goes, if you go 3,000 miles, that cord would still be attached. It's only when that cord, that supernatural cord, is broken that death comes to that physical body. The blood that the vampire would get would be transferred through that cord, that silver cord, much like a straw, would go back into the physical body, which was in the grave, and this would rejuvenate the body and keep it alive. That's a true vampire today. But, you know, a lot of people wonder about Count Dracula. Well, now we're going to Transylvania.
Is there such a place as Transylvania? There is, isn't there?
Transylvania is part of Romania. It's in the Carpathian Mountains. In fact, we want to plan a trip probably next year going to the Carpathian Mountains and seeing what's left of Dracula's castle.
Oh, wow.
And I want you to come with me, Tony.
Okay, I'm game.
And we will be on an exploring trip there. And I had a very dear friend, we did, Dr. Devendra Varma from India. He had traveled all over the world in search of vampire cases and had written many books, to the extent that he was knighted by the Queen of England for his work in that. Dr. McNally and Dr. Florescu, two professors here in America, had spent 15 years in Romania looking for Castle Dracula. And when they finally found it, which was high up in the Carpathian Mountains, it was in such a remote area that very few people ever go there. Dr. McNally, looking for this castle, had told Lorraine and I that he was so stunned by what they had found and a little shaken up that he didn't really go into the castle ruins because it's high up, about maybe 1,000 feet up on top of a mountain.
Yeah, it says the first year that he found it, he never entered that castle. His son, in fact, after all the years of research, his son entered the castle for the first time before he did, because it had such a negative, profound effect on him.
Now, there was a real Count
Dracula, yes, Vlad Tepes, who lived during the 14th century. He was a very cruel, very, very cruel man. It's said that he had impaled something like 10,000 enemy soldiers. And when the Turkish army was coming to invade his part of Transylvania, when they seen this, they said, "This man is mad. We're not attacking his castle." And they turned around and went back again. But there have been many such cases. But I think Whitby Abbey, where you've been, and Lorraine and I have been, which is on the North Sea in England, was made very famous by Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker wrote the first book on Dracula.
Right.
And it was here at Whitby Abbey that he had his Dracula land. And we've been there. We've seen some very, very mystifying things occur. Now, remember, when a place like Whitby Abbey has a history of vampires, even though it's only in a book, it draws very weird people to it.
Oh, yes.
And they perform many different kinds of ceremonies. If you went to Whitby today, at the foot of the cliffs, there's a small village, which is Whitby, and it's loaded with paraphernalia of vampires. In fact, there's a vampire museum there. But I will never forget the many nights that Lorraine and I and small groups of people who had gone there to take photographs, and where the structure of Whitby Abbey has fallen all apart, there's one wall that has 3 windows still left, high up. One night we seen what we call the green ghost.
It looked like, the only way to describe this, Tony, we had a whole group of people. Now, you've been to Whitby many times with us. You go down the side, you go through the arch and down the side of it. You're still like on that ground level, not, you're looking up on the Abbey.
Right.
And we got to a point where the 3 windows were at one side of it. Just the outline of what now remains, which we'll be showing later in the show. And in the middle, in the very middle window, we watched this green, well, I don't know how to describe it.
Ghost-like figure.
And it moved like a candlelight type of thing, like the flame from a candle.
Yeah.
It moved just like a flame from a candle, but it was a spirit that was right in that general area at that time. And the most frustrating thing happened. Here's all of these people there to take photographs, all of our researchers that were there to take photographs. And
now, this is at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
Cold and windy and
Cold,
raw.
Oh, you know how cold it is there. And
There's something scary about it, but it's also something that's beautiful about it.
Mystically beautiful.
You can't put your finger on it, but it's scary, but you love it. You know, it's beautiful.
It's beautiful, that's right. And Tony, it doesn't matter if you're there during the day or at night. It still has that air about it. There's still that air.
Well, you remember one night.
I remember one night. I don't want to talk about it.
Well, you got to talk. You got to tell the folks out there what happened to you on that night when we were wandering around Whitby Graveyard, which is right at the edge of a high cliff going off into the North Sea.
That's the night that a black cyclone of wind attacked me, probably came within 3 feet. And it was about more or less, it was more like 3 in the morning. I remember we arrived at about 2. And it was only about an hour into it. We had the camera set up, we had the recorder set up, and the flashlights and all that. And we had a couple of people with us, but they were off in the distance. And I remember fiddling with my camera on the tripod and getting a sense of something behind me. I had a sense that there was First I thought it was another researcher, but it felt funny. I had a funny feeling.
That was in the middle of the graveyard.
That was in the middle of the graveyard. I turned around and I saw, probably about 8 feet high, 8 feet tall, this black cyclone of wind. That's the only thing I can describe it as.
Shadow ghost.
A shadow ghost. And I could sense the evil, and it was drawing energy from me. And that's when I yelled for you, remember? I yelled for you to come. So I started screaming, actually, for you to come. And you came running over with holy water, and you were saying, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave and go back to where you came from.
That's right.
And that I'll never forget.
That's an experience.
That is when you and Lorraine and a couple other people had to help carry me back to the car. Because I was just physically
Oh, yeah. That's
emotionally just distraught.
Well,
Yes.
we were there last year, Tony, and we had a few people with us. Had a young boy, he was about 17. He was walking back to our car through the graveyard when suddenly what we call a ghost veil just floated right across that cemetery. Now, if these people could see Whitby Abbey Cemetery at night, they would know that this has got to be one of the weirdest places
One of the
on
weirdest.
earth.
One of the
It
weirdest
is.
in the world.
Oh,
Huge, tall gravestones and the wind blowing
Yep.
on the edge of a cliff. I can see why Bram Stoker picked that
it.
place.
I could too, definitely.
definitely.
Lorraine, I'd like to ask you, I think what we should do is start to get into the slides a little bit. Talk about mysterious places too, besides Whitby. How about Stonehenge? You had
Oh, that's
some feelings
beautiful,
at Stonehenge
Tony.
that
Now, this is one of the trips that I had, that we had the pleasure of having our daughter with us. You and Judy have traveled with us a great deal.
You know that lady, Tony?
looks vaguely familiar to me. Oh, that's my wife.
And, but we're standing by Stonehenge. Now, the very first time, Tony, I ever visited Stonehenge, it was a real profound experience.
Wasn't that where you said you were re-energized?
It was, I had probably close to pneumonia. I was there in January with a group of students, and I was miserably sick. But the following day, they were calling for snow. So the students wanted to go down to Stonehenge, no matter how I felt. So I went down with them. We went down from London, where we were staying. We drove down to Stonehenge. Now, when I arrived, I went by the lead stone, right by the lead stone, which you could see in there. And I put my hands against the stone in this manner. And, Tony, it was as if I plugged in to a tremendous source of energy. I remember sharing this and how amazing it was. It was
almost like a shot of adrenaline, huh?
It was healing. It was a very positive thing. It was a very healing thing, just by putting my hands on the stones.
I'd like you to do me a favor, you and Ed both, when you're over there in May this month.
Chip off a piece
Bring
of
me
the
back
stone.
a stone.
Bring it back a stone.
What I'd like to
Well,
do
the
is-
stone's only about a foot high now because everybody's been chipping pieces off.
I'd like to go, if I could, to another monster.
Yes.
We'll go back to
Very
Stonehenge.
famous
but
picture.
I'd like to see this slide of the Loch Ness Monster. There it is.
Yes, well, let me say, Tony, that is the only other place that I felt that type of energy. And that was one night at midnight. We were near Drumnadrucket, which is the far end of Loch Ness. We were directly across from where Aleister Crowley's home was.
Oh, yes, yes.
And at that time,
He was
Jimmy...
called the Beast.
Yeah.
The Beast.
And Jimmy Page, you know, the drummer, he was occupying it. He was renting it at that time. And I was sitting on the edge of Loch Ness. Now, this is the same year that I
I
was
think
there.
this next slide will show what you're talking about.
That's Urquhart Castle.
That's where the picture was taken.
That's further down Loch Ness. There we are with a group. And at that time, I felt the same type of energy there, Tony, but it felt in a way like that water was like a heartbeat. That's just about what it looked
But
like.
that's at 1 o'clock in the morning. on
Yes.
That
Loch
shot right
Ness.
there?
Yes, that's at 1 o'clock in the morning on Loch Ness. And it was like a giant machine, like a beating of a heart. That's the only way.
Really?
Yes, that's the only way I can describe it. Here again is another shot looking down at Loch Ness from Urquhart Castle. That's the area where the Loch Ness Monster had been photographed the most.
I'd just like to interrupt for 1 sec. people think like, the loch, like, we have little lakes around here.
Yeah, that's
They
the
think
same.
maybe it's like a little fishing hole. Loch Ness is 26 miles long. And Ed, how deep is Loch Ness?
Nobody really knows how deep Loch Ness is, and the problem with finding the so-called monster is that the water is full of plankton to the extent that you can't even see 6 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what could keep something like the Loch Ness Monster alive, really, because you have numerous huge salmon in that river, or in that loch, I should say.
Now, this end where we are right here, Judy and I, again, this is the far end right by St. Benedict's Monastery. Now, St. Benedict's Monastery, there's a priest that has been there over 40 years. And this particular...
I have to tell you something. I have to interrupt right here. Did you just see that shot?
Yes.
That was a windy, cold day. Everybody was looking for the Loch Ness Monster, and I turned around, and Lorraine was across the road, and she was taking a picture of something. I said, Lorraine, what are you doing? She was taking pictures of bluebells. We're looking for a Loch Ness Monster, and she is taking pictures of the bluebells.
Bluebell flowers.
Yes.
I never lived
Bluebells
it
of
down.
Scotland.
I never lived it down.
I think you have about 36 pictures of bluebells, too, don't you?
Yes,
But anyway, what's the next slide
But
that we're going to?
that is Father Gregory Brucey. That is a priest who has lived, Tony, at that
He's the
monastery
prior of St. Benedict's.
for 40 years. And on 3 occasions, that man has
witnessed?
the Loch
He's been
Ness
on
Monster.
many television shows, national shows, where they've interviewed him. I think one of the outstanding times was when he had a new organist. He was only at St. Benedict's probably about 8 years when this new organist came in to take over, and they were walking down by the loch. And he said suddenly there was a great eruption of water, and they seen this huge head coming up with a snake-like neck. And both of them, of course, were startled. But the man was so startled that he actually ran away, and they never seen him again after that.
Wow.
He wouldn't work at St.
He
Benedict's.
wouldn't work there.
Unbelievable.
No,
huh?
he wouldn't work there,
This
Father
next slide,
told us.
if I'm not mistaken, and I believe the next slide would be Whitby Abbey. I think the graveyard.
This is the graveyard.
Oh, yes.
Graveyard. Notice how tall the stones are there. And on a rainy, windy, cold night, with the rain glistening off these stones and dark in there,
The wind blowing.
that is a place that very few people would want to be.
Oh,
Okay,
and
the
it's-
next slide is Whitby Abbey. I know.
Yes, that's
Parts
part
of
of
Whitby Abbey,
That's
right.
part of Whitby Abbey. Yes, these are all part of Whitby Abbey, the old abbey there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful
Leading
shot.
up-
Isn't that beautiful? Going up the
You know how old
stairs.
those stairs are?
How old are those stairs?
They must go back, God,
Wasn't the Whitby Abbey
14,
built
1500
in the
years.
1400s?
Yeah.
Was it the
14th
1400s?
And
century,
remember
I
that
think.
usually where
yeah.
a monastery like that would be, there was another one before that.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the Germans or the English would spot the convoys coming through, and the Germans got the same idea. So they had lookouts at Whitby Abbey, the English, and the Germans came up with a submarine and bombarded it one time. And
Yeah.
they blew a lot
that
of it away.
was a lot of damage was done at that time when
That's
they
a
did.
shame.
It is a shame. It's
And
a
then we have
real
one more
shame.
shot, I believe, of
Yeah, now this is interesting because, in a lot of these old castles and abbeys, they had dungeons. Now, when a man was put into a dungeon, there was usually water that ran nearby, which was the North Sea, of course. They would feed him some salt pork. Now, this man would slowly die of thirst. But imagine watching that water out there in the ocean, eating salt pork with your tongue swelling up, how you must have suffered. That was the cute little things they did
Oh, how
during the
horrible.
medieval
Oh.
days.
that was horrible.
Horrible things.
We do have a couple photographs here that I'd like to go over if I could, Lorraine, and we took these pictures the last time we were at Whitby Abbey.
A year ago, Tony.
I'll show the first slide of I guess this is the little coffin, a little casket grave site.
Yes. It's right there where I'm
Is
looking.
that a child's coffin?
Yeah, that's a child's coffin, honey, where there's a child's coffin.
Did you get any
Yes.
sensations when you were looking at that, Lorraine? Any feelings at all?
Very sad feelings, Tony, I remember. Very, very, very sad feelings I had.
Now,
there.
this is a good shot of Whitby.
Oh, that's a
right here.
beautiful
And there's the
shot.
3 windows that we talked about.
Oh, yes, right down there in the back. That's right. That's where we witnessed
Now
that
you're looking
ghost.
off to the North Sea there.
That's the
The
North
next
Sea.
stop from there would be up in the North Pole.
Wow. Now, this
Now,
picture here,
That's Tony.
that's us in the corner there where there's a little... Like
That stairway, Tony, that,
Right.
yes, where Ed photographed, closed in on it later, but that's you and I, right? And look at how the wind is blowing our
I think
clothing.
this picture here is me when I was... This is when I was a little heavier.
When you were a little heavier. Oh, pull up, Tony, yes.
That picture
Yeah,
is when
but
I was just a hair
heavier
tad
than you-
heavier than I am now.
You're standing there kind of funny, too.
Yeah, it looks like I'm crooked there.
No, I think you're probably blowing, Tony, with
the
the
wind
force
was
of the
really-
wind.
the
I
wind
just
was
want to say
very
that,
bad.
you know,
Yes.
to go to this place at midnight, and we take groups of people there. We'll leave the B&B, the bed and breakfast, which is on the North Sea, an old manor house. Go there about midnight, and we stay all night long until the sun comes up. But these people go with cameras and recorders, and they get tremendous psychic pictures there. But you know, it's not just Whitby Abbey that has achieved fame because of vampires. In North Woodstock, Vermont, in 1898, a man by the name of Curtis, his body was exhumed by 7 medical doctors at the medical school at that time because they felt he was a vampire. And this is in the history of Woodstock. It's right in the library. They exhumed his body, and he had been buried 6 months before. His body was as fresh as the day they put it in there. They had surgically taken out the heart, put it in a pot, put it on the village green, and burned it to ashes. They performed ceremonies, religious ceremonies, over the body and over the heart and buried it. But for years later, where they buried that heart, on the village green. Now this is the medical school with 7 doctors and a director. There would be rumblings and psychic phenomena. Psychic energy would seen all around there. They would hear all kinds of sounds. But the most interesting thing is that 20 minutes away from where they buried this man in the graveyard was a small village called Chittenden.
I've heard of it.
Still there today. And Chittenden was made famous by the Eddy brothers. The Eddy brothers were boys that would manifest numerous spirits, even as children. Their father was kind of a cruel man. He was a farmer, ignorant. And when the boys would go into a catatonic state, he thought they were fooling around. He would actually take live coals and drop it in their hands. And they bore those scars right till the day they died. And they did live to be in their 90s. But in that farmhouse in Chittenden, which is still there today, 40 and 50 apparitions, images of ghosts and figures from all over the world. Now, I'm talking 1898, I'm talking 1870. Their mother came from Scotland. She was very, very clairvoyant. And they were very clairvoyant. They were physical mediums, but to the extent that 40 and 50 apparitions would appear. They would be in full dress, sometimes princes from India, Arabia, kings and queens of the past. And people would go to this old farmhouse, and they would stay there for a week. I think they paid something like $5 for the week, room and board, just to see these manifestations. But it was so famous that Colonel Orcott and Madame Blavatsky, who was the leading medium of her day, came from Russia to the United States to go to Chittenden to experience these phenomena, which they did. Now, not far from the farmhouse was a cave. It's called Honto's Cave. It's kind of a rock that goes up, and there is a cave there.
It looks like a grotto.
But a lot of the people that would visit the Eddy farm would go to this, as Lorraine said, a grotto. And when the moon was full, they would see 30, 40 Indians in full regalia. Those are American Indians. And among them, of course, was what they called Chief Honto, who would appear on the stone. We've gone there. Lorraine had experiences, which she can tell you about now.
I've had numerous experiences, but there at the grotto that Ed is describing, Tony, the stones come down so that it forms almost like a waterfall effect on either side of this grotto. And I watched psychically as the spirits all stood right in line coming down, almost like there was some sort of a show that was being put on. It was so beautiful. Now, others that were with us described a feeling that came over them, but it wasn't visible to anybody, and unfortunately, we never captured that as a psychic photo as we did the photos taken in Borley Church, which was a remarkable thing. But still, there was communication.
Okay, so to sum up, Stonehenge is a mysterious place.
It sure
You've had
is.
experiences there. Okay, Whitby Abbey we know is a mysterious place.
Oh, yes.
And there's evil that could manifest itself there. I've had
Yes.
that happen there myself.
Yeah, that could be that sad
Vampires, Ed, you say, are real. Are there even more recent cases than that one? Or you think there's a vampire out there today, perhaps?
Oh, I know that at Highgate in London that they have reported what could be vampires. Lorraine and I went there. It's one of the weirdest cemeteries you'd ever want to see. Goes back over 1,000 years, of course. And the tombstones are so old that the trees have grown right up around the tombstones. It's like a forest there. But Highgate would be another place where vampires were reported.
I'd like to say to the audience, if I could, when this program is aired, when you physically watch this program on your local access channel, unfortunately I won't, but fortunately, Ed Warren, Lorraine Warren will be at Whitby Abbey. They will be in all the haunted locations. They're going for 2 weeks in May, starting May 16th. So I would assume that when this show is broadcast, they will be going all over.
The moors of Scotland.
The moors of Scotland and Borley, places we've talked about before, where Doris May was at the Holly Bush. They're going to be at all those locations. Lorraine and Ed, I appreciate tonight. I appreciate it. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Again, the address to write would be P.O. Box 41 in Monroe.
Yes.
Just address it to the Warrens.
Yes.
P.O. Box 41 Monroe 06468.
Right.
To the Highlands of Scotland.
To the Highlands of Scotland also. So until next time, for Lorraine Warren, for Ed Warren, and bring me back some good scotch.
Oh, I promise, Tony.
I'm Tony Spera. Good night.